It turns out that close personal relationships that are healthy are it's the greatest longevity hack, probably probably along the same lines as exercise. One of the things that I'm really fascinated by and obsessed with is mitochondrial health, because basically these are the batteries of our cells. When mitochondria become dysfunctional, they actually send out smoke signals and they overheat. So they produce inflammation and oxidative stress. Not all stress is bad, because some stress makes you stronger. So it's really about the dose is the poison. The problem is that chronic threat is a battery drain, because the medical system doesn't want to pay for health. They want to pay for broken bodies.
Welcome to the Uncover Your Eyes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Meenal Agarwal. Did you know that 85% of your disease risks comes from metabolic and mitochondrial health? Something we rarely talk about in medicine. Today, we're joined by Dr. Molly Maloof, physician and author of The Spark Factor. We're going to shift your focus from living longer to truly living better, and we'll unpack the biomarkers that matter, how sex, connection, and boundaries play into longevity, and how you can start improving all of this today without any expensive tools or fads. Thank you, Dr. Maloof, for being on today. So tell me a little bit about the difference between lifespan, healthspan. I know there's a difference,
Sure.
and your focus is on one of them.
Well, my focus is on figuring out how do you extend health span to lengthen lifespan. So a lot of people are just focused on the number of years that we live, but I am interested in the quality of your life. And so quality plus quantity is the goal. The goal is that you live a lot of long and healthy years. And if it turns out in the super centenarians, they live really, really well until the end of their lives. They actually compress morbidity into the last 3 years of their life. Whereas a lot of people have like 20 years of sickness and ill health. And usually it happens around midlife when men and women start noticing around 40 that their bodies are changing, that they're starting to notice the effects of aging. They're starting to get grays. They're starting to, get the back pain, and they're just noticing the changes of existence. And one of the things that I'm really fascinated by and obsessed with is mitochondrial health, because basically these are the batteries of our cells. But they're also these mini supercomputers, and they're sensing and integrating the environment and determining where to allocate energy. So, is it a safe environment? Can I think about reproduction? Can I think about reproducing? Can I think about growth and repair? Or is it like an unsafe environment where I have to focus on survival and focus on, avoiding danger? And so what I've been really fascinated by is basically this biological imperative, which is to survive and reproduce. And so what do we do to survive? We go and find food. What does food do? We digest it. It gets turned into substrates that go into the mitochondria that fuel the batteries of our cells. But what happens after that, right? Like, who we surround ourselves with determines if we're going to create a family, right? We might find a mate, person to make children with. And it turns out that close personal relationships that are healthy are it's the greatest longevity hack, probably probably along the same lines as exercise. So exercise is easily the best anti-aging drug. And yet so many of us are still sedentary. I have certain days of the week where I spend way too much time in front of computers, but exercise sends the signal to the mitochondria to create more of themselves. So it literally is the signal for more batteries. Is like you give your body a stimulus, and it says, "Oh, that means tomorrow might be challenging, so I should actually make more energy to anticipate the future." So our bodies are always sensing and integrating and trying to anticipate how to survive and reproduce. And when you really boil down health to these two core pathways, you realize that it's not that complicated. But yet, what we're challenged by is modern life is not the same as it was in primitive times, right? We don't live in tribes anymore, sadly. We need to. We actually need to create more close-knit communities, close-knit relationships, and really invest in our relationships. We were just talking about how important it is to invest in family, because it is probably going to lengthen your life more than anything else.
Wow. So tell me, we talk about, metabolic health really is, the key factor to increasing our health span.
Yeah.
So how is the link between mitochondrial health and metabolic health, and how are they supporting each other?
Yeah. So, as I was mentioning, when you consume food, you have to break it down into substrates, but you also break it down into micronutrients, right? And the substrates would be like the precursors to what can enter things like the TCA cycle or ketosis, for example. So fatty acids go into turning into ketones, right? Carbohydrates turn into pyruvate and acetyl CoA that goes into the TCA cycle, and that gets burned as fuel. So then you produce energy in the form of ATP. Proteins are interesting because they can turn into basically they can go down either pathway, the ketogenic pathway or the carbohydrate pathway. And but in order for all of these pathways to run properly, you actually have to have micronutrients because they keep the gears turning. And there's this thing called the methylation cycle, and it requires a large number of micronutrients to run properly. So your metabolism encompasses so many different pathways, right? It encompasses detoxification pathways, producing nucleotides for DNA, producing neurotransmitters for your brain. So there's so many different things that metabolism encompasses. So when I say what mitochondria, what they do for metabolic health, they also have a role in hormone metabolism. They produce sex hormones and stress hormones, and they're largely found in our muscle. So they determine their strength, they determine our endurance, I mean, they're just so ubiquitous throughout every single cell of the body, aside from the red blood cells, because red blood cells carry oxygen. So if we had like raw oxygen being burned, it would be really hot and it would also light on fire. So this is why we can't have red blood cells carrying mitochondria. But the red blood cells deliver the oxygen to the cells. So our body is kind of like a tree inside out. So our lungs are like the leaves of the tree, right? They're
Right.
breathing us, right? And they're enabling us to consume oxygen. Trees consume carbon dioxide. So we have this beautiful synergistic relationship with trees. But then trees' roots are in the ground. The soil is what feeds them. We produce soil by the food that we consume, and that literally becomes our poo. So your microbiome can actually reflect a lot about your metabolism. And in the last decade, we have learned so much about how the microbiome interacts with mitochondria and how fundamental they are to each other. And we have this synergistic relationship, symbiotic relationship with the microbiome of our body in order to produce vitamins and minerals, in order to produce, like literally, like B12 metabolism is partially dependent on your microbiome. So, microbiome is also important for producing neurotransmitters. So when you take an antibiotic, for example, it can literally change your makeup of your serotonin producing bacteria. So you can actually just get depressed from one dose of antibiotics, which a lot of people don't want to even acknowledge, but it's true. Like these can change your mind and change your brain. So metabolism and mitochondria are essentially, you know, the mitochondria are a huge player in metabolism, but
Right.
you know, they are the fundamental driver of energy, and whatever energy is essentially life. Like life is energy plus information plus structure. Mitochondria have this incredible role of playing a role in all aspects of what life is made out of in our bodies. So if life is energy, information, and structure, so we have this physical structure, we have information signals going through the body, and we have energy metabolism that keeps us alive. They produce energy, but they also are sensing and integrating information signals and sending them and communicating with each other. And actually, literally, mitochondria come together and they communicate. They share energy and information. They break apart. And so they act like these little mini humans inside each cell. It's so interesting. They're actually social organelles. And from there, if you want to actually have growth and differentiation of tissues, if you want to have any healing response, you need energy. So they play a major role in the actual physical integrity of the body. So that's why I became so obsessed with them, because I'm just like,
Yeah.
how important these are, and how I, you know, and the moment you figure out something in the body, you start realizing there's so much more you don't know. And what I also didn't fully realize was how important they are to the immune system and how important they are to producing or reducing inflammation. So, inflammation is essentially a type of cellular signal, similar to oxidative stress, where a little bit of inflammation and oxidative stress is good, but too much inflammation and oxidative stress is very bad. And when mitochondria become dysfunctional, they actually send out smoke signals and they overheat. So they produce inflammation and oxidative stress. So when you see somebody who has these markers on their blood, like high homocysteine or high CRP, what you need to think is this person has metabolic dysfunction. If they have high blood sugar, if they have high lipids, they have metabolic dysfunction. They are losing the capacity to maintain the integrity of the structure, and the metabolic baseline numbers are a reflection of your capacity to maintain your health. And so when you see the body that way, it's a little bit different than just like, oh, this person has high blood pressure or high cholesterol or high blood sugar. It's like, oh, this person is losing the ability for their body to function properly, and they are setting themselves up for heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and dementia. So it's really, really, really crucial to think through how to actually work through first principles and fix the metabolism rather than try to just patch all these markers with drugs or
Right.
supplements, which
Are
is
the
something.
biomarkers the same? So, we're really just looking for the biomarkers of metabolic health that is going to indicate your mitochondrial health, or are there separate biomarkers that we're also looking at, or specific ones?
Well, when you look at the microbiome, there's hundreds of biomarkers that are not necessarily mitochondrial biomarkers. They're really biomarkers of the microbiome. So, but the microbiome does play a role in metabolism, right? So it's not always everything boils down to mitochondria, right? But it does mean that they are the first alarm signals in the cells that you can see easily through measurement. And because it's not that easy to get a stool study from a regular doctor, it's pretty easy to get a typical blood panel from a doctor.
Right.
Although I do like a much longer, broader panel. And with the beauty of where we're living today is we've got companies like Superpower and Function Health that are going out of their way to help democratize access to this information. But over a decade ago, when I started my medical practice in 2012, it was very difficult to get this information unless you could pay cash. And it's still kind of difficult unless you pay cash because the medical system doesn't want to pay for health. They want to pay
Mm.
for broken bodies. But unfortunately, by the time that you are ill, really ill, it's a little bit too late, honestly. Like you don't want to wait until you have a diagnosis to
Right.
fix yourself because by then there's real end organ damage. And even with prediabetes, there's end organ damage. Like you actually have lost part of your beta cell function. And I was borderline pre-diabetic, and this is what got me started on this path. I had a really rough time in my late 20s, early 30s. And had just a lot of challenges, and I ended up with chronic fatigue, and I was really unwell, and it's probably why I started my practice because I was like, oh my god, I have chronic fatigue and I have borderline prediabetes, and I just believe that I need to build a medical practice around health because I need to understand what health is because what I have is not health and I want to
Right.
get there, but I wasn't diseased.
Mhm.
So I wasn't like full blown disease. I was just like, and at the time they thought chronic fatigue was like, they thought it was a made up illness. So I just knew I wasn't energized. I knew didn't have energy, and I knew my fasting blood sugar was around 100. So I knew something was wrong, but I was committed to fixing myself. And the funniest thing is that I did, but then I thought I was invincible for like 8 years straight. I was like on an upward trajectory of like the more I can accomplish more and I can do more and I have more energy and I have more capacity, and I just kept on trying to challenge myself because I was like, well, what more can I do? What more can I do? So if you go to my LinkedIn, there's this like, embarrassing amount of accomplishments because I just wanted to see I wanted to express my full potential. But what I've learned in the process is that just because you have the energy doesn't mean you should spend it. It's like a person
Right.
gambling. Doesn't mean that you should play all your cards, right? Like you might go broke. And so I actually ended up with mono for the first time in my life last year, and that really knocked me on my butt. And I went from feeling invincible to be like, "Oh my god, is this really happening to me?" And
Yeah.
I had to kind of make a massive life adjustment because I was living in this attitude of I can just biohack everything. But now I'm like, wow, if I'm a high performance race car, I should probably not be driving this car every day if I want it to last for like another 50 years. Like I shouldn't be revving the engine every day. So I really want to write another book on just I need to write so many more books, but there's just so much that I keep on learning about health. Once that you've like started on this path of studying health,
Right.
you realize there's just, oh my God, now I need to understand the immune system. And if your immune system breaks down, then you have to learn that. And it's like every illness or challenge that I've ever faced with my own health has been my greatest teacher. It has made me a 10x better doctor. So in weird way, I wouldn't wish some of these things on anyone, but I definitely am grateful that I was able to have the ability to heal. And I'm such a believer in our capacity to heal and regenerate. And right now, we are living in a golden age of medicine because we are literally entering an entirely new era of regenerative medicine that is going to blow your mind because of what we're learning about stem cells and peptides and exosomes and gene therapies and immunotherapies, and we are going to see the most amazing boom in biotechnology that I honestly was kind of like, after spending all this time in health and wellness, I was like, I don't really know if I want to take part in that movement. And then I started looking at it and seeing it and realizing, whoa, science is actually so profound. And like, I would be silly to not incorporate these
Of
things
course. Yeah.
into my world. So now I'm in this whole new journey of, and honestly, it came out of wanting to know what's going to get people past 100. And like I think lifestyle in the young, like if you're a preteen, a teen, or 20 something, and if you incorporate the kind of longevity oriented lifestyles that are written about in a lot of the bestsellers these days, like good energy, like um outlived, like my book The Spark Factor, like Dave Asprey's book, if you read these books and you start incorporating these learnings when you're young, you will actually be able to get to 100 pretty effectively. Now,
Yeah.
if you're like midlife and you're like, oh shoot, I've already messed up my body a few times, that's when you're like, okay, I need to probably start incorporating some of these regenerative interventions. But if you're young, you should not be necessarily like, if you're young and healthy, you should not be using NAD. You should not be using a lot of peptides in your 20s. Like you should not be doing stem cells unless you are sick. And I just feel like there's a big problem right now I'm seeing with a lot of young people hopping on the longevity bandwagon before they're at all ill, and they're thinking that these things are good for them when actually they might be actually setting themselves up for cancer or chronic illness because they don't know what they're doing. So we really do need to bring a level of scrutiny and order and regulation to the space of longevity.
Right,
Like
and balance, right?
it
I say, like, and balance, right? Like, for
needs to it
example,
needs to
people doing red light therapy, it's like they're sitting in the red light all day, right? I mean, there has to be a level of balance with everything you're doing, and I think that's so important. But I share in your passion, because my podcast journey was born out of my own illness as well, and my desire to learn about everything and learn from experts like yourself. So,
yeah.
I thank you for that. Tell us, like, what are some things that people are getting wrong about Healthspan? What are they doing, or, the top
Oh,
few things that you want to tell
I was
everybody to
really
stop
listening.
doing?
Yeah, I was listening to the CEO of Eli Lilly yesterday, who's an incredible human being. He literally had like 800% growth in this company because of these GLPs. And there's a lot of people in the health and wellness space who are just potently anti GLPs, right? They're just like, oh, these are just, you should be doing this all naturally. Well, having worked with people who deeply struggle with obesity,
Hmm.
um, these are wonder drugs, and these are not just tools for obesity. These are tools for longevity. Like insulin resistance is unfortunately a big part of aging, and microdosing things like retatrutide can be really profoundly useful for someone who's hitting mid age and they're starting to notice mitochondrial dysfunction. But that does not replace sleep, exercise, food, nutrition, environment, relationships, and the basics. And what I loved about this guy on stage was he was talking about how, like, because he looks really young, he looks like 10 years younger than his age. And it's like, he's like, I do the basics first. And I sleep really well. And it's like, I
Hmm.
sleep really well. I mean, sleep is such a profoundly important tool in the toolbox. I just believe in it. And sleep is just so important.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
just cannot ignore sleep. And the basics, the foundation of your pyramid should be your lifestyle. But a lot of people also get wrong their relationships, including myself. Like the reason why I had a health breakdown was because I literally was in two sequentially toxic relationships that were not safe. And when you have chronic unsafety signaling in the brain, it breaks your immune system.
Yeah.
because your immune system needs coherent messaging in order to function, to defend you. And if you can't get your body into a state of coherence, energetic coherence, heart coherence, and your heart is like in a state of incoherence, like your HRV is low and your heart rate is high because you're not feeling safe, that is going to drain your batteries. So many people ignore the relationship piece. And I'm actually giving lectures on this now. I'm doing 2 keynotes this year because I'm like, everybody, you're wasting your time on all of this detailing of the car, not realizing that the car's locks are broken and people are breaking into the car. Like, there's like these all these issues that people are dealing with health wise, and they're not looking at what's driving those issues. And so stress is obviously a thing that kills us, right? But we always
Yeah.
think about stress from like financial stress or environment or like the news environment, but we're not really looking at our relationships and the way
Relationship.
that we are treating ourselves and the relationship we have with ourselves and how that manifests in the way in who we surround ourselves with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you really love yourself truly, you don't subject yourself to toxic
Yeah.
relationships. So I had
Yeah.
to learn the hard way that like if you really love yourself, you don't put yourself in these positions.
Yeah.
So that those are some really big things that I think people are missing. And at the same time, I think biotech, I think there's a big problem. So I learned this in the COVID pandemic. Like everybody was on, there was so much polarization from the health
Right.
and wellness world to the biotechnology world. Everybody was fighting. There was like the anti-vaxxers and the pro wellness people, and everybody was fighting. And it was like, I now see everything as like a Venn diagram. And I'm like, okay, what from the biotechnology space do I want to take? And honestly, I don't want to take the. I shouldn't. I do regret the vaccines because they did cause some problems in my health. I think they play. I think the COVID itself plus the vaccines did play a role in my immune system becoming dysfunctional because I already had pre-existing celiac disease. But I'm not going to blame it all on those two things. But they definitely there was a definitive before and after of my health with
Right.
those interventions. But does that mean that I throw out all biotechnology in health span extension? Absolutely not. There's a bunch of new stuff coming out like that I'm fascinated by, like stem cells, right? And then the other side is the health and wellness world. They think that they have it all figured out, but I have seen so many health and wellness gurus get sick, like super sick, and you cannot just believe that like if you live this pristine lifestyle that you're never going to need medicine.
Yeah.
That just isn't reality. I'm aiming to try to create bridges between these worlds, right? Like, how can I show the world that both can work? How can I show the world that, like, you don't have to be keto and you don't have to be vegan? Like, both can work at different times. Like, there's a time and a place for a plant based diet, there's a time and a place for a low carb diet. You don't have to pick one permanently. Like, you can use these as tools rather than dogmas. And that's the thing I would like to help people see through it. It takes a lot of critical thinking, unfortunately, and a lot of people just want shortcuts. But we need more critical thinking in health and more first principles thinking when it comes to how we live our lives. And honestly, nature is the greatest teacher. And I wish more people would look to nature for lessons. And having lived on an elk refuge for a year and a half, that was probably one of the most enlightening experiences because watching animals exist and how they thrive in adversity was a really, really incredible lesson for me. That I don't think I could have learned if I wasn't like exposed deeply to being in like a very strange environment. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
So tell me, a little bit about stress because you talked a bit about stress and like,
sure.
how is that affecting our mitochondrial health, our
Yeah.
metabolic health, and why is it so important to reduce that?
Well, okay. So I love that this is a great question. You're an incredible interviewer. Not all stress is bad. I wrote an entire book on the concept of hormesis because some stress makes you stronger. So it's really about the dose is the poison. So the problem is that chronic threat is a battery drain and you will break eventually from allostatic load. So I want you to think about stress like you have a cup and you're constantly pouring stress into the cup. But if you don't have a very big cup, then the more stress you pour into the cup is it's going to overflow and that's allostatic overload and that's when the cells become highly dysfunctional and start to break down. So you start having like you don't have enough energy to maintain the structure. So stuff overflows and things start to break. Now, what can you do to make a bigger cup is what nobody's asking. Hormetic stressors done properly, which by the way, I've done them improperly and I've done them properly and I know the difference. And it's taken me a long time to be able to teach this. But a little bit of fasting here and there is actually a hormetic stressor. It's going to make your cells, it's going to give you a bigger envelope for that allostatic load because it's going to stress your cells and induce survival genes. Going into keto occasionally is actually going to stress the cells and send famine signals. But if you're in constant continuous keto, some people can thrive on that diet, but a lot of people actually do have health breakdowns from it because
Mhm.
it's sending famine signals and then they have too much stress and then their hormones start to become dysfunctional. So it's about dosing yourself properly, right? Cold stress. Some people thrive with this. Not all women do really well with a lot of cold stress. Women going through menopause actually do better with cold stress than women in fertile years. So you have to dose these things, time these things properly throughout your life. Heat stress, sauna, hot tubs, fantastic for health. But if you were to be in a sauna for like 2 hours a day, that would be sick. That would make you sick. I had a client that was using a cold plunge 20 minutes a day, and he thought he was getting healthier, but it was during the pandemic, and he was breaking down his immune system. And not everybody is Wim Hof, so it's about using the lowest possible dose to get the effect that you want. And unfortunately, people think more hormesis makes you stronger. It's actually like dosing it properly to get the effect that you want, the minimum viable dose, so that you don't end up with a toxic byproduct, right? So, hormesis is crucial. HBOT, fantastic for health, but I know people who've overused HBOT and then they end up unwell. So it's about dosing yourself properly and getting proper guidance in these hormetic interventions. Um, for example, plants. I love foraging wild plants, but if you eat too many wild plants, you can get poisoned. So like you gotta prepare these foods properly. You gotta source them properly. But plant foods are really really good hormetic stressors. But too many plant foods in like an autoimmune body is not going to have the same effect as somebody who can tolerate a plant-based diet.
Right.
So autoimmune individuals tend to do a little bit better sometimes. It depends on the individual, but I see, an ancestral diet, it can be a little bit less immunogenic, but some immunogenicity from a plant-based diet that activates the immune system, sometimes that's good. So I think this is where medicine's going. This is where, that's the healthy stressors. The unhealthy stressors are honestly, when I stopped reading the news every day, my stress levels went
Me
down
too.
like 50%. I just stopped sitting in front of my phone for an hour in the morning staring at the news. It's like, what a waste of my time. I think we need to bring back newspapers, honestly. They're much more calm. They're much calmer to read.
Right. Yeah.
But like, you know, um, what are other ones? Like a big environmental stressors. I mean, caregiving stress is a real one, right? So, I think there's a lot of moms out there and a lot of, kids who have sick parents that don't fully realize what caregiving does to the body. And like, you actually have to put your face mask on first. And we should probably be living more tribally with other families so that there's
Support.
so that kids need to live in environments that are so safe that they can run free in their neighborhood for hours without having to be paid attention to.
Oh
Like
yeah.
that was my childhood. Is I could leave the house for 4 hours, my mom would not care. Like I was in the woods playing with my sisters, Like
Mhm.
that, unfortunately, we're losing that. And kids are losing their connection to nature and they're being stuck on screens, and screens are oxidatively stressful. So get this, when you stare at blue light, you are actually getting oxidative stress. You're resting your body from the inside out. But when you go outside and you get sunlight, you are reducing oxidative stress. When you ground your feet in the earth, you are lowering oxidative stress. You are unresting your body. So you should always be trying to do things that are going to heal your body. And so sunlight is healing. It's not, as long as you don't burn yourself consistently, sunlight is crucial.
Yeah.
Circadian rhythms are really, really important. A huge stressor is people disconnected from the environments that they're in and having circadian rhythm disruptions from poor sleep habits. Terrible for health. And I mean, when I got that right, that was a major turning point in my health when I got my sleep cycle regulated. And I can't tell you how crucial this is. Light diet. You need to get multiple doses of sunlight throughout the day, and you need to get outside. And people just don't understand this. And it was one of the main reasons why I didn't fully have a health collapse last year. Was I was so aligned with nature. if it wasn't for the fact that I had my circadian rhythm and my diet dialed, I would have actually been really, really sick last year.
I love that you talked about just like even being out in nature and even your feet on the ground. Cause I always tell my kids, they're always like, I need to get my shoes to go in the backyard. And I'm like, no, you can go without your
No, no,
shoes.
no,
Just
play
go
in the dirt,
outside, right?
get
Because we
filthy.
used to just like walk around barefoot in mud and like all of this stuff. And when you look like you're talking about those tribal days, that's they didn't have shoes. So it's
Yeah,
so important, they say from the ground up. And I love that you talked about the news as well,
yeah,
because it was funny. A friend of mine was like, "Oh my God, did you hear there was a shooting near our house?" And the video was awful. Let me send it to you. And I'm like, no, don't send it to me. I don't actually want to see it. So, because sometimes those trigger those, it makes me stressed and it's
yeah,
unnecessary, like you said. So, in terms of, relieving that stress, let's talk about, like, it's important, and a lot of the stress comes from relationships, right? Our family, and a lot of
yeah,
us have boundaries, relationships with friends. So I know you have created this Adamo method, and
sure.
about connection. I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think
Yeah,
what's important is how can we move forward now and reduce those stress
yeah.
factors.
I mean, I have an entire lecture that I give on relationships that I taught at Stanford, and the thing about loneliness that is the first thing we need to talk about, which is we are living in this delusion of a separate self, and we are not designed for social isolation. We just aren't. It's deeply stressful on the nervous system. So, but you can feel alone and be surrounded by your family. So that's the sad thing about modern life is like you can have subjective social isolation and objective social isolation. So, it can be really challenging to be with family. And we tend to have unresolved parent issues and unresolved sibling issues that, unfortunately, if they're not worked on consistently, it can be really, really challenging to maintain relationships. But I really believe in repair, and I really believe in like using every rupture as an opportunity to grow and take responsibility, and not don't pass up the opportunity to like grow and learn from making mistakes. You learn way more from your mistakes than you learn from your successes. And so we need to stop aiming for perfection in relationships, but also loyalty is really important. And I think it's important to like sort of have expectations and communicate your expectations for relationships, and and really try to assess like who truly has your back. And
Yeah.
having gone through like a massive dark night of the soul and come out of it really happier than I've been in a long time. I would say that like we need a lot less of these acquaintance relationships and these sort of pseudo relationships, and we need a lot more depth and quality of relationships. And you really need to focus on relationships that truly feed you, and be the kind of person that you want to be, the kind of friend that you want to have around you. And also recognize that the people that you spend the most of your time with are going to determine a lot of who you become. So it's crucial to like put yourself in the right social environment, because you are going to be affected dramatically by the people that you spend the most time with. So that's the sort of social recommendations I have. When it comes to intimacy, I would say, intimacy is something that I think a lot of couples struggle with. It's easy in the very beginning when you're like falling madly in love and you've got all the hormones driving everything, but it's really tough later in life, um, when you're like, when you're like in 3 years into the relationship and the honeymoon phase is over, and like, what do you do? And it's funny because in India, people don't realize this, but the Kama Sutra was literally a kind of method of helping couples use their physical connection through their bodies and these positions. They believed that these positions, similar to how like yoga can strengthen various
Right.
facets of the body, they believed that the Kama Sutra, these positions with your partner, would actually strengthen your relationship and give you greater social standing. So I was like, wow, when I realized that like Kama Sutra was not just about pleasure, it was about self actualization of your relationship. I was like, whoa, this is like a different perspective that I have on this. And then I learned about this type of thing called Karma Mudra, which is it's called the Yoga of Bliss. And it was by
Okay.
this Dr. Nita who wrote a book on it. And he wrote a book on how you use sexual union to basically raise your consciousness with your partner and actually be a spiritual path of like transcendence. And that's a whole nother level of thinking about how sex can affect our existence.
Yeah.
And I have a very different perspective on sex than I did in the past, where it's like ideally you find a partner you want to build a life with and have a householding relationship with if that's what you want. But ideally through that relationship, we as women actually recognize how much power we have on the outcomes of our lives and the outcomes of our partners' careers and the outcomes of our own careers, because sexual energy is the most potent source of creative inspiration that can come from human existence. So it's like it is part of our creative drive, is our sex drive. And it's not just about reproduction of people. It's about creating ideas and companies and books, and it's a productive force of existence. Love is actually a massive motivational drive for survival. And and I think that people don't really understand love, and they don't really understand sex because we're not taught this. It's kind of this thing that we're expected to just understand by being human, when a lot of people are confused about these
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
I spent 3 years studying them, technically more because it's been since 2021. So it's been like 4 years of studying love and sex. And I have a very different perspective on this now because I see love as both positive and negative. Like it can be extremely damaging to fall in love with the wrong person. It can be extremely damaging for someone to fall in love with you when you don't love them, like
Right.
stalkers, right? Domestic abuse, women can stay with an abusive partner because the example of love that they got from their parents was what they are now living out as adults. So it's so important that we recognize that our love maps come from our parental influence, which is why if you are a parent, it is so crucial that you actually understand that you are programming your child's entire life around love by the way that you interact with your partner. So it's like if we understood this, the weight of our actions and behaviors as adults, we'd probably be more careful with who we choose and who we partner with, who we mate with. And yet we actually let an addictive drive of romantic love to actually get us to become, so the sex drive drives us to romantic love, right? So the more we have sex with someone, the more we're likely to fall in love with them because it really drives a lot of dopamine. And then once we have enough sexual contact with someone, enough orgasms with someone, that actually and physical touch, that drives attachment because that's oxytocin. And oxytocin is really the most healing hormone because it literally is anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, it's cardioprotective, it's mitoprotective. It's fun, it's so fundamental to human existence that I actually ended up finding a mentor to teach me everything I could learn about oxytocin because it is such an important neurohormone, neuropeptide. It's what drives the birthing process. It's what drives the parent-child bonds. It's what helps children's brains develop. It's what drives lactation. I mean, it plays so many roles in life that when these parent-child relationships become dysfunctional, it can lead to eating disorders. It can lead to obesity. It can lead to all sorts of other downstream effects. So that's why I'm really like, I think I've personally waited a long time to partner because I think it's the most important decision you're going to make in your life. It's going to have the biggest downstream effects on your existence. So the Damo method was really trying to teach couples about how to have painless, pleasurable, penetrative sex that can provide you with a path to deeper intimacy, greater love. We actually have measurable improvements on both sexual markers like sexual satisfaction and sexual desire, sexual orgasm frequency, orgasm quality, but we also have been able to statistically significantly improve feelings of romantic love in between partners and intimacy. So we chose attached partners. So we didn't see a major improvement in attachment because we chose people that were already in long term
Already. Yeah.
relationships. But we definitely saw statistical improvements in human love. And the thing is that the reason why I invented the company was I really wanted to create a psychedelic assisted sex therapy. But psychedelics are unfortunately still politically charged and not rescheduled. But I think in the next decade, we're going to probably see psilocybin rescheduled. And I developed a nutraceutical and some pharmaceuticals that actually do modulate human love pathways, but they are very difficult to commercialize because they have a lot of ethical consequences. But I did create one very safe formula for couples, and it's a really fantastic aphrodisiac for women. Women actually have greater responses to tryptamine neurobiology because of the level of estrogen in their bodies, which is fascinating. And actually, if you prime a man with estrogen, they have different effects of psychedelics. It
Hmm.
actually creates a more profound psychedelic effect. So I think there will be a world where I can fully bring this to light in a clinical context. But I think we're about 5 years away from even thinking about that being realistic. But I do think it's coming. It's just that company is a little bit like we're selling the sex therapy, but we're not going to commercialize the whole program until honestly the government catches up with the science.
It's so interesting though, like to see as a physician your take on, talking about connection and relationships and that improving your health span. I mean, your
Yeah,
stress levels, which trigger like poor metabolic health and all of that. And I
yeah,
loved your take on just explaining how stress works. This was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Molly. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you? And we will link your book in the show
sure.
notes. And we've talked about that a little bit at the beginning. So tell me where they can find you.
Yeah, find me at www.drmolly, drmolly.co, not .com. Unfortunately, I have the co, not com. Drmolly.co. And then same thing on Instagram at drmolly.co. I'm on X at Molly Maloof, MD, Maloof. And on LinkedIn, Molly Maloof, MD. And then I will eventually start a YouTube channel and a TikTok probably this year, but I'm not there yet. My book is called The Spark Factor. The Adamo method can be found at livingadamo.com. And yeah, that's about it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Molly.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, listeners and viewers, for tuning in. If you want to catch more episodes of Uncover Your Eyes, make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. To learn more about me, follow me on Instagram at dr.meenal Agarwal. Until next time, keep those eyes uncovered.